Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Storied Arcs Tankobon Podcast crossover event covering Pluto. I am your host, Mike.
And I'm the co-host, Alex.
And I'm Cole from the Tankobon Podcast.
And I was going to say this is our final episode, but I dare say we may come back for a discussion of the Netflix series once it drops.
Yeah.
But this is our conclusion of the book.
It's the final book episode, yeah.
So we're covering volumes 7 and 8, and there has been questions about which chapters we're covering. The good news is this week, I don't have to remember. Just read it all. Whatever you haven't read, finish that, and then come listen.
Yeah.
But we're glad you're here. Glad you're sticking with it. I think Alex and I talk about this a lot on the podcast in terms of comics, but it's very hard to stick a landing. It's easy to, not easy. It's easier to build intrigue and kickstart something and say, oh, there's interesting characters, there's interesting machinations in the world. But getting a quality ending is difficult. I think this was a very strong ending. But I'm curious what you guys think. Just initial impression, where does this rate for you?
It's funny. Before I get into that was the first thing I had in my notes here, is that how often, Cole, on our regular episodes, we talk about endings, especially anything that goes 3, 4, 5, 6 volumes, whatever. Most endings are okay. Some are like actively bad, and then the very few are like superb, where you get to the end and even if you can see some of the strings of the story pulling and how things come together, if it's done elegantly, you get to the end and it's deeply satisfying. And that is incredibly hard to do. It's much easier just to stop and get to an ending that can still be satisfying. It can be a satisfying ending, but you're like, okay, that was the end, versus if you get like an exceptional one, which is incredibly rare, I think, in all storytelling. And I got to say, I think, I reached the end of this, and I can understand why it's so heavily awarded, why it's revered, because I think, albeit I think some of the emotional beats are a little cheap, not cheap, but like there's some gut punch stuff there. I think specifically with Gazit, when we get his full story, it's just like, at the end there, he's going to come in and Urasawa is really going to twist that emotional knife. But I think it works because some of those things, he's been leaving those breadcrumbs from volume 1, right. And it's not like you forgot them, but you kind of almost do, because he's no longer an active character in the story. Right. So anytime we see him, it's only through some level of flashback. And you think of, well, why would we need to flashback to him? Then obviously the in-story reason is because his memory chip is what gets inserted into Adam, which what wakes him up. So we have that connection again. But as you're reading it, you don't know that at the time. But no, I think this ending was incredibly satisfying. I think it's very deft. I think something we've talked about before was the idea of, he's adapting an existing story. So kind of the end was known, I guess. You know how it's going to end. Anyone, I think specifically in Japan, probably knows the story, again being possibly the most popular story of one of the most popular characters of all time, like the OG manga. So like, as initially published, people are going to know this story. So not saying that everyone reading it in Japan would have, but a lot of people would have come into it.
It takes some of the suspense away.
Yeah. Exactly. That's what I was building towards, the idea that most people coming to it in Japan, they're not reading it for the ending, unless Urasawa was like, I'm making a hard left turn here and doing something completely different, which I don't think he would do. I think he's shown enough reverence to the original there. So most people coming to it aren't coming to it for the mystery aspect, right? For the resolution aspect. And even as someone who just consumes stories, and when you're told this is off an Astro Boy story, you're like, okay, well, that means somehow in the end, Adam's coming back. So like it's going to end in he's going to win, right? Like he's going to win in the end. So there's no suspense there, even for someone who's not familiar with this specific story. So I think Urasawa is aware of that. He knows the audience. He knows what their level of story recognition is going to be, right? He's almost like he's expecting his audience to have that. So while that's important to the actual narrative, that's not what you're reading it for at this point. And so it has to deliver on other levels. It has to deliver on on other story beats and some of the character things that he set up in his story. And that has to land because the overall narrative is going to land. Adam's going to come back. Adam's going to win. He's going to do it by not, there's going to be a big battle, but it's not going to be like a battle to the death. It's not going to end with violence. I think that was something I could have called back in the first volume, like how it was going to end. It was going to end anti how it was being set up. So that seemed obvious to me. So he has to deliver on these other levels that he set up. And I think he does that beautifully. I think he lands that plane, as to say, and hits all of those character beats in a way that is incredibly satisfying. And like I said, in some ways, a little gut punchy. I'm not going to call them cheap, but like, again, I'll go back to that Gazit flashback. And when you see
the 500 Zeus thing, the whole time, yes. I thought that flashback was someone had blackmailed him or something.
Yeah.
And then to find out what it actually was, I was like, oh.
Oh yeah, no, that comes in hard. You're like, because if you remember that as you're reading that scene, and you're building, he's talking about, I sell these parts back or whatnot, and it's almost like, oh no, like no, wait,
there was when he turned his head at one point. I was like, I don't want it to be that. I do recognize this man, and I wish I didn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like, no, please don't be. This is what that origin is, and when you see that it is, it's an incredible gut punch. Because I don't know how much.
But again,
I was expecting Gazit
earned over the course of 8 volumes, and I mean, how many chapters?
100% earned. But again, because Gazit's no longer an active part of the story. How and why are we going to go back into his backstory? And for him to do that in a way that still felt like it wasn't just rammed in, is obviously it's because of the setup that these are the things, these are the feelings that are coming through his memory chip that Adam is accessing. I think that's the way it's supposed to be read. So it gives him an avenue back into that story to see that his life was not one of Gazit's life was not one driven by hatred and anger, all the things that that Dr. Tenma kept needling, the idea of how do we wake these things up? We got to give them extreme emotions. And it always comes down to hatred. It comes down to anger. And even in the moment after he inserts Gazit's chip into Adam, he's thinking that too, because he's thinking that Gazit's life has ended. His final moments, his final thoughts were one of anger, one of anger and hatred. And that's what's going to wake Adam up. But it turns out that was a misguided thing. It was him seeing that the flower selling child and having him have that memory. And so it was a positive, it was a happy memory. It was one of love and compassion. So again, I think we talked about it last week, the idea of when Tenma talks about extreme emotions, he's only going to the negative. And it's that idea of it's some commentary on humanity, right? That anger and hatred is somehow seen as a defining characteristic of being human. When on the other end of the scale that maybe we access less is that love and compassion that humans are also capable of, but maybe get they're not seen as strong. Those are seen as like soft emotions versus like ones of strength and aggression on the other end. So no, I thought that wrapping all of that up in also what he needs to do of getting through the story beats of like Abra's true origin, Pluto having some level of recognition and like just and coming back to like the teddy bear and all of this and Brow and tying all these loose ends up. He has to do a lot of narrative things to finish up his story, and he gets through all of that. But what sticks with you are all those emotional beats, those character beats.
Yeah. All right, Cole. What do you think of the ending? Feel free.
You guys
not made it easy to disagree.
You guys made it. Mentioned it about comics that it's kind of tough to end these, and that's something I think about a lot. Manga. It seems like every long running manga series has a bad to mediocre ending, right? Like Naruto, Bleach, Attack on Titan, Demon Slayer. Like if you look at the top 10 most popular manga, 8 of them have like an ending that you're like, it wasn't great.
This is why Batman and Amazing Spider-Man will never end. They will stop and someone will start again, because those stories will never ever end, because they don't. Because what ending could possibly and of course those stories have been going on for in some cases 80 plus years, but you got something that's going on for 10, 12, 15 years. What ending could possibly be as good as exactly.
No, I mean, we've literally had those characters in recent years get sniped in the head, and we wheel them back out for another issue next month.
No one ever dies, never ends. But some of these long running mangas, as long running as they are, they do eventually come to an end.
They have to. The artists get too worn out, right?
Too burned out.
You can't make Naruto for 50 years. You gotta stop. So and the ending might be just all right. But that being said, I mean, Urasawa, I've read this now and I've read Monster, and I found it fascinating to kind of compare both of those series because they both have pretty similar pretty similar overall like styles and just like the vibe of each manga. I think I've mentioned it before that like Pluto, if you told me that Pluto was like set in the monster universe, whatever, 1,000 years in the future, that'd be pretty spot on. Like they have a similar air to them. And I think they're just the kind of the setup and the way the story flows is pretty similar as well. Like in Monster, from kind of the get-go who the villain is, kind of what the mystery is, and basically how it's going to end, right? Like these stories are never going to end with the quote unquote bad guy coming out on top, right? Like the protagonist is always gonna win. And same deal here. Just the difference with this is Pluto, that it has a lot more mystery kind of in and of itself, but not as much if you have read like the Astro Boy series. Mm-hmm. So like by reading Astro Boy beforehand, it almost is set up a lot more like Monster, where like from the beginning, what Pluto is, right? You kind of know what's going on, what's going to happen, but he still does such a great job of like keeping it interesting. And like I said, I read the Astro Boy one before this, and still every chapter was like, I don't know what he's going to do here, right? Like, or it's like, oh, this character doesn't exist at all. So, that's a whole. There's multiple plot points here that just aren't in the Astro Boy one, at all. And I will say, I think he ends these both very well. I think there are some parts that just they don't feel like they're entirely wrapped up like too cleanly, but I think we've mentioned it before where like it still feels like, oh, there's more in that universe, which is almost it's almost nice that like not everything was completely sorted out. Like we had the hooded anti-robot guys that still left a little bit just kind of in the ether, like what why was that there necessarily, what's kind of going on with that.
They still exist. They're still out there. Robots still exist in society.
There's a lot of stuff like that that's just sort of still floating there that like maybe in a if this were 10 volumes, some of that gets a little more of that gets tied up, but it's almost, it doesn't feel detrimental to the story that there are quote unquote loose ends, because it's just like, oh, I'll figure it out getting back into this universe.
I feel like when they tie up every loose end, sometimes it robs you of your imagination. Whereas like I like that the world is a little bigger than the story, right?
Exactly. Yeah. He wraps up his characters, but he doesn't wrap up the universe.
Yeah.
Because you mean one of the final scenes there is he's Adam has let Brow off the hook and he travels to not America and he basically kills the president, and then presumably kills the president and then kills the puppet behind him. So there are then questions. Okay, that wraps up what was going on there, but like a robot just assassinated the president of a country. Like, so our anti-robot group in hoods, like that's just catnip for them. Like we a robot has now actively gone out and assassinated a world leader. There are larger questions there. So yeah, he doesn't wrap up the universe, but he wraps up his story. He wraps up his characters, so that the story you've been reading is done. You can literally close the book on that. But yeah, there are other questions. The world still exists. The world still goes on. There is still something that happens the next day. And Mike, to your point there, sometimes when stories wrap up too neatly and they wrap up everything, and then there is no question of like what comes next, what happens the next day. Some of those are, I guess they can be unsatisfying in that way, I think, because you're right, there is no room for imagination. There is no, and the story goes on, the world goes on. And sometimes that's often sad, especially if it's an immersive world, one that the creators have put time in building and you're invested in general. For them to wrap everything up and to be like, no more stories, that's kind of that's a different kind of letdown, I think. And I'm with you, Cole. I think I'm glad that Urasawa didn't do that. He left his world out there. He didn't fix his world. The world isn't fixed. You know, the problems that he was highlighting, the metaphor of robots and humanity and these two different species or whatever, these two different groups trying to coexist, that all still exists. None of that's fixed. You know, there's no big kumbaya moment. All those problems are still there. But he just found a way to tell his story and wrap it up and leave the reader thinking about these things and questioning that and wondering what happens next, and knowing that, hey, maybe, and it's up to you now, the reader, after we see what Adam has done and the level at which Adam has now ascended to, I guess, or whatever, is that a good thing for human robot relations? Is it a bad thing? Does that only fuel the far anti-hate side again? All these kinds of things that you can go on and on with endless questions about the world. And I think stuff like that is great, because that means the creators have done their job to get you invested in the world that they built. I think that's an asset to the story when you get to the end and you don't want more of your story. You want more of the next story that you, the reader, have thought of. You can go in any direction of, maybe someone wants, hey, what's going on with this hate group? Like, how do they deal with that now that we know they exist? How does the just general human robot relations, whatever aspect of the world that he built that you locked onto, that really connected with you, is still out there, and you can let your mind go and think about what comes next.
By the way, sorry, no, go on.
I was just gonna say, and Urasawa spends a whole lot of time kind of crafting these really big, like grandiose ideas of like, the laws of robotics and that thing, and like kind of this difference between like robots and humans and stuff. And then it's just sort of like you finish it and it's just like, that's still there. Yeah. Even I mean, the teddy bear character, it's sort of like you get flashes of it throughout the story. And then even then, still at the end, it's kind of like, it's still pretty shrouded in mystery, right? Like, that's not necessarily like cleanly tied up. It's still like,
where did he come from?
Backstory there?
Exactly. What's his origin? Exactly. He's you just know he's there. He's a figure there. He's an important figure, but you don't know anything about him.
Yeah.
He didn't feel the need to go back and address that. Which, maybe you're right. Maybe if it was 10 or 12 volumes, maybe there's a couple chapters in there he can go back in. But I'm going to guess he didn't feel that was necessary. All you had to do was accept that there was someone behind the power, behind the throne, who was directing and manipulating all world events. That's all you had to do. Once you accept that, and accept that it's a creepy teddy bear, once you're good with that, that's all you needed. That's all you needed to know. So, but those parts, I think those parts really stick with you. The parts that you latch onto, whatever aspect of this world that connected with things. I think it's something we talked about. I think it was last week too. The idea of how does a story go on without our main character? Gazit is dead now, and I think what we were all three of us talking about was how even when we went away from the main narrative of like who is Pluto and who's behind it and all this stuff, there is still so much in the last two volumes, 5 and 6, that kept you interested, because there are the other parts of the story that you're latching onto, right? That there are other parts of the story that are important to you outside of the very specific A to B to C to D to E part. So once you get past that, if you're not into that, or if that's less important to you and there's nothing else to grab onto, then the story just falls flat. If you don't have those extra bits there that readers can decide what's important to them. If all you have is the story, if all you have is the narrative, which again goes back to the end that people in Japan reading this probably wouldn't be latching onto that, because they would know the story. They would know how it ends. So you have to add something new to it to get people to to really commit to the story. And for him to do that, I think in such an effective way is really, really impressive.
Yeah, I want to dig in. I feel like we're doing the 10,000 foot view so much that I do want to hit some particulars of the story. And
right.
since it just came up, I do want to ask about this letting Brow off the hook thing, or kind of unleashing the mad dog is what I guess the Joker would call it, or Harvey Dent in Dark Knight. But Adam asked him to go assassinate someone. It seems like he's like, I need you to go do this thing, and then. So, I mean, like,
kind of.
Adam knows what needs to be done, but knows not to get his hands dirty. And technically, the number of robots who have killed a people in the world has not changed.
It's still the
because
same.
Brow's already done that.
Yeah.
And so that was a sacrifice that Brow could make without, making a larger case again. Obviously, people who are determined to be anti-robot will be anti-robot no matter what. How Adam even knows about Teddy is beyond me. But he's the most intelligent robot. He's got every personality in the world programmed into him, and he now has all of the other.
I think that came from Gazit, right? That was some of the things that we didn't see. It was part of his investigation. Yeah. So he has that point, he has all of the information now. He prior to Gazit's death, right? He had the way I read it was that he had figured the whole thing out. He knew what was going on. And then he was killed before he had a chance to share it with anybody. But that was still in his memory chip. So when Adam gets that, Adam now has that information, and whether or not that was Gazit's plan of like letting Brow off the hook and letting him do this, or that was what Adam realized needed to be done. I think all of that comes from Gazit.
Yeah, but I just thought it was interesting that our big hero moment is that he's not a killer. He doesn't do these things. And then it's like, oh, what sweet resolution. And then it is like, oh, no, but he did like order someone to be assassinated.
Well, I wonder if that's.
Or did Brow go rogue?
Well, I wonder if it's sort of done to complicate Adam a little bit more, and that Adam knows that, like, Roosevelt needs to be eliminated.
Yeah.
But he like literally can't, right? Because robots are supposedly designed that they can't kill humans. So this is the only way to sort of do that thing.
I like that. The idea of, him. There is the idea of this idea of the greater good, right? The idea of like, this is what needs to be done. It's a terrible thing. So we'll get a terrible person to do it. And in, that it's like the two wrongs make a right kind of thing. Which is a very human rationalization. So maybe that is an idea to give some, when you drill down a little bit, to give Adam a little more depth, that he's not perfect, which is, I think, leads into the larger point of the whole idea is to not be perfect. Robots are perfect, but humans are not. And he made a very human choice there. The robot would make the rational choice of we can't just eliminate them. We have to change or just get them out of power. We have to change things. We have to do things the right way. While a human would look at that and be like, well, if we just take those guys out, like that fixes things right there,
Yeah.
So maybe it is an idea to make him imperfect and thus make him more human.
Yeah. Well, with 6 billion personalities floating around in there. And I mean, and we do see that hate is the thing that unlocks him from his like stasis mode. But he's able to get through that only because Gazit did.
Yeah.
In his final moment. And so I think it's interesting that the whole book opens with Gazit, not knowing the story. I assume he's our main character through the whole series. I had a jaw-dropping shock when he died, even though it was telegraphed. We'll get past my naivete. I also didn't think Epsilon was going to die, despite so much data to the contrary. But I thought,
despite literally every other robot, that was
every other robot, and we're getting the villain's eye view where they're talking about hunting him.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but he's the pacifist. He doesn't deserve to die. Nope. Turns out he did. She.
I think I think it's he. I think it's meant to be.
So.
Okay.
Yeah. But but it was, Urasawa's not afraid to have a body count. He went out of his way, said these 7 robots are targets, and that's what we're going to kill. And he did. He killed all 7 of them. So, not shying away.
Yeah. And it's pretty impressive that he's able to, they flash back to what was it, North, whatever it is in volume 1, the piano
North
playing
number 2,
robot. North number 2.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh dang, I almost forgot about him, but I immediately felt fond because of how well that character was handled.
Oh yeah, no,
in the time we had him.
I love that sequence when Adam kind of goes back through. Is like, Mont Blanc, like, they're all
who we never met living, right?
Yeah,
we only see memorial and tribute.
And in flashback, the idea of that, like, all these robots were designed as weapons, but he loved the forest, he loved the people there. That's what he wanted to do. North number 2 was a weapon. He just wanted to play music. Hercules and Brando were, they were enemies or opponents because they were wrestlers, but like Brando loved his family. Hercules loved his country and loved the adoration, loved his fans. Epsilon, obviously, was taking in orphan children. Like, so the idea that all of these robots had something else in their lives that drove them beyond what they were designed to do, which was to be weapons, and for Adam in that last moment not in that last moment, but towards the end there, to tap into all that and acknowledge all that all 7 of them had something else out there, and to have that be part of him overcoming that hate that woke him up. So it's almost like it wasn't just Gazit's feeling of love and compassion for his wife and their child. It was like all 7 of them having that extra thing there and understanding that they could move past this and they didn't have to be bound, and none of them wanted to just be bound as weapons, and so in that sequence, having to go back and having him kind of, rattle off all those tallies and show that each one of them was, what else they had going and what was important to them. I really love seeing that he was kind of pulling from that collective. It wasn't just Gazit, it wasn't just one of them that had this higher plane of understanding. It was all 7 of them found something else beyond what they quote unquote were. And that all helped Adam in that final fight to help, turn Pluto and get him to overcome his programming and what he thought he had to do. He was being controlled, and ultimately to get to some peaceful resolution.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great handling of characters that were being killed, and I mean, I can't stress that enough, because I think when a writer knows that a character will die, I think they tend to write them in a certain way to protect you from too much attachment, unless it's just like it's George R.R. Martin and it's all shock value.
It's either one or the other. It's either they're underwritten or they're almost overwritten. So that either you feel nothing when the character dies, or just like cannon fodder, or you feel like overly attached. You're like, oh my God, what just happened?
You're like, why am I still even reading this?
Exactly.
Series? Yeah.
What's the point if you're gonna his characters up and then just get rid of them? So there's almost just kind of a binary there. It's very hard, I think, to do something in the middle. But I think Urasawa erred on the side of, like, for the most part, we're gonna make you care. I'm going to invest in these characters. Really, with the exception of, I guess, all of Mont Blanc. I guess you need to start somewhere. But all the other characters, he put time in showing you what was important to them and what they had to live for, I guess, and then why they would kind of individually decide to then fight. So the idea of what they're fighting for, what they felt they had to protect, outside of the larger mission of, like, we got to protect everyone, they got to protect the world. Each one of them was fighting for something very specific, something very small that mattered to them, which again I think is a very human quality.
Well, even Mont Blanc, we don't see Mont Blanc alive, but I think he does a fantastic job of sort of characterizing Mont Blanc in those. It might just be the first chapter, the first couple chapters, where, like, you finish those, you're like, oh, this Mont Blanc guy, pretty great. Like, what a good dude. He's, he whatever it was, he didn't want the statue in the forest because it'll, like, block the landscape. Or
Right,
he's like he's like always trying
universally
to
loved. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
highest Q
like,
rating. Yeah,
exactly. Everyone's like, this guy's the greatest. So even in the very very short time we kind of care about Mont Blanc and the story, you still come away from it, you're like, must have been all like, wish I got to know him kind of
exactly.
deal,
Yeah. The world would have been better with a robot like that around. Clearly, because he made everyone's life better. Everyone loved him.
Yeah, which was a little bit of a softball, but maybe there was no dark underbelly to show, which is why we started with him dead. Whereas every other character we met
had a little shade.
He was too pure.
Yeah. He was. Yeah, that's why he's first to go. Definitely.
I mean, we open with his corpse, I think, is like the first page.
Yeah, pretty much.
And the Pluto symbol. So I did think the villainry of, this character is actually this character but thinks he's this character, and a split personality, and there's Pluto and there's Bora, and Bora's half of this I was like, that felt a little convoluted. It like really truthfully my only nit to pick.
I agree.
I'm wondering, is that from the original Astro Boy?
Sort of, kind of. The way it sort of works in Astro Boy, to I guess to kind of spoil like that arc a little bit.
It's 50 years old. You can spoil it.
Yeah, is that
60 years old almost? Yeah.
Is that basically there's this like king that wants to create the greatest robot in the world. So he's done that, and he creates Pluto, which goes out and starts slaying all the other robots. And then this other robot, I think in Astro Boy, it's called Bora, but that didn't sound familiar as I was reading this, but it could have just slipped my mind. It comes to kind of challenge Pluto, and it's found out that like the person who designed Pluto was this robot who also designed Bora, and was to kind of like show the king, like, you're not supposed to create robots like this. It was some deal like that. It's a little hazy and kind of nebulous even in Astro Boy, just because the story is so like simple, right? And it's only 180 pages long total. But it's something along those lines. So like I agree that I think Urasawa's version is pretty convoluted, but I think he was trying to do some semblance of that without it being exactly that,
There are elements that you talk about. There's a king wants to create the greatest robot in the world, right? So that's our King Darius character, our Saddam Hussein analog there.
Yep.
And then he creates,
again, subtly drawn.
Yeah, very. You could never tell. But then you talk about like the other scientists, like that seems to be Abra, right? Who was Abra and then died, and then thinks he's a cyborg, but he's actually a robot. But he's also split personality Goji, which is maybe that idea of maybe the other scientist there, right? And then so now we have Bora, which so he created Bora and Pluto and what Sahid or whatever his son was created out of the robot, which is that consciousness there that he's controlling. So there are aspects there. I think it's how he kind of wove that in. And I agree with you too, Mike, that it is convoluted. I think for me, because those were the specific narrative beats, like in the story beats, that I personally cared less about, like Abra being actually a robot and him thinking he was a human and just the cyborg parts and all that stuff. Like there's a twist in there, and there's probably part of the commentary of the running commentary of like, what does it mean to be human, to be a robot, things like that. For me, that specifically just kind of washed over me because I cared less about, for me, it's like, okay, Abra's the bad guy. I know Abra's the bad guy. That's already been revealed. We've seen that. We know he's controlling Pluto. The specifics for me were less important. So yeah, I definitely agree they're convoluted, but I just kind of glossed over those. Like, I don't really care about this. Get me to the other more emotional beats there. So.
And the substance of my nitpick, I think, is that I was thinking of this like a mystery, and I don't like the little Deus Ex Machina reveal when it's like, oh, here it is. It's this one person. It's actually two people, and he used to be a robot, or he used to be a person. Now he's a robot. It's like, well, there were no clues where I could have guessed that.
There kind of is a little bit of one. There's this part in chapter 51 where Iran's kind of like reading this book and says like, you see Geppetto's really a puppet too, just like Pinocchio, which I think kind of clues in some of that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Where,
Yeah,
like, the creator's also a robot, and there's some of this. Because
that's definitely foreshadowing. Because I did think as she was reading that story, I was like, clearly this ties into something.
Yeah. It still leaves the kind of the split personality thing a little bit nebulous, but I think it does at least it pulls back the curtain on that a little bit.
On Abra being
like
actually
the
a robot.
twist.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good
right.
point.
I like the idea. I like the twist. I did have like but the longer I thought about it, I was like, well, I couldn't have gotten there, and that is just something that like just kind of miffs me. Whether it's a Sherlock Holmes story or some other mystery where like, oh well, the character just then uses information I didn't have to reach a conclusion, and I'm supposed to be impressed. I'm like, well, yeah, if I had all that information, I would have figured it out too.
But then the flip side is, if you had that information, it wouldn't be a reveal, it wouldn't be a twist.
Well, and then my criticism of my criticism is that I was like, okay, well, Pluto isn't a straight up mystery.
No,
it plays with mystery themes, but it is not a mystery.
So
I'm judging it like that. That nitpick is based on if it were like just trying to be a mystery.
Yeah. And obviously that was the kind of your onboarding into the story is the idea that it's this giant.
Oh yeah, I've been
mystery.
telling people it's a mystery for months.
It's a murder mystery detective story that expands out to be like a serial killer mystery. A global serial killer mystery. Who done it and who's killing all these robots, and that's the entry. But yeah, I mean, once you get into the story, it's so much bigger and so much beyond that. But that is, you go back to the beginning. That's how Urasawa gets you in. That's the premise of the initial, the initial start of the story. The beginning. Those first steps are murder mystery. Who done it? Who's Pluto? Who is killing? Why are they killing? What's Bora? Why are they focusing on these people and on this group? So there is a lot of mystery aspects there. But yeah, by the time you get to the end, those mystery aspects, and for me, were now no longer important because I no longer saw it as a mystery. Even though that was the clear onboarding mission was get you in and asking those questions. Well, he answers so many of those early on. Before the end. So the twist is the only twist there, really. I guess they're the two twists. They're that Abra is a robot and didn't think he was, and then the split personalities. And I'm with you. I think the robot reveal works a little better. I think the Pinocchio call is a great find and one that I forgotten from when I read this. The split personality one that Abra is actually Goji, who's actually this other super famous. That one's a little harder to swallow. Again, for me, I think less important is like, oh, okay, because Goji he's been mentioned for the last 3 or 4 volumes, I think, when he first came
pretty
up.
Quick.
Yeah. So he's not a name that's been floated because obviously the whole point is he's this name that everyone knows, but nobody knows who he is. No one's seen him. But yeah, he hasn't. That isn't a breadcrumb that's been there since like the beginning. That's really just kind of the back half. So for me, I wasn't expecting that to be a major reveal. Honestly, wasn't. And then when it turned out it was like a split personality of Abra, I wasn't like, oh damn, I'm let down because I was expecting some huge thing. I had almost not forgotten, but it was like backburnered of like, I don't think this guy's going to be important. Just in terms of how I was reading it. And so I wasn't let down by that. But I do agree with you, Mike. That's one, the split personality twist, that one really does kind of come out of nowhere.
Yeah, and it comes out of nowhere. It is a clever twist. Like, I can't deny that it's clever. It holds up. The tricky one for me, like, the more I thought about it, and again, now this is where I'm like going back through the story and saying, did he set this up to be more plausible? Because I'm like, so the guy's a robot, and I guess like he transferred his consciousness right as his body died, and the robot just picked up without missing a beat. But does this robot not realize that he isn't eating food and going to the bathroom, and he doesn't need to sleep? Or has he, like Adam early on, enjoying tea and ice cream? Is he like, so like involved in the mimetic process of like I do what humans do that he's not even noticing like,
well, I think also
I just get up and go to the bathroom.
His setup is that he thinks he's a cyborg, right? That's how he saved his body, right? Because he was he believes
he doesn't need. Yes,
he thinks he's a human with cybernetic parts, to the point where like they talk about him early on. It must have been in 3 and 4 because Adam was there when they have everyone walk through the gates like human or robot, which like I don't understand why you have those gates in general. Like, what's the purpose of those? But anyway, when we see Abra walk through those and maybe he sets off, or I can't remember what it was there, but the idea of he's acknowledging that yes, I have cybernetic parts here. You know, he believes he is a cyborg, but fundamentally human. So yeah, the idea of the things he can or can't do, or maybe the things that he's missing from his human experience, he just chalks up to being a cyborg. You know?
Yeah.
It's plausible deniability.
Right. If he doesn't have to go to the bathroom, it's because it's like, well, that part of my body is robot now.
Yeah,
but I still have
I
still have a physical brain.
Exactly,
and a soul or whatever.
Maybe like neck up, I'm still human, but maybe my body is essentially all cybernetic, all robot.
Yeah. So I forgot about. Okay. Yeah. So that again, that makes it hang together a little better, and that conversation, the first conversation between Gazik and Adam, and just completely unrelated thought. Do you guys get the impression that 500 Zeus is a lot of money?
I don't know if I thought about it, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it's cheap. Like, it's junk, right? He's just like, sure, 500
that's what I was going to say. He's scrap metal dealer, right? He's a junkyard guy. So,
and he was like, I don't care if you take it or if I smash it. It doesn't make any difference to me at all. 500 Zeus.
Yeah, so if I had to guess, 500 Zeus is like a yen comparison.
Probably.
Like $5-ish.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So then I have to ask,
anything he gets is better than nothing.
Little bot home. I'm like, come on, man.
Well, because that one was still that one was still alive. That's why.
Right. No, but like, maybe go through the rest of the pile. See if there's, if
there's a few others
other than the one you happen to see. Like, drop 10,000 Zeus, my guy. Like, this is a real campaign to save robot life. It's like, nope, I did the one. I've done my part. We're done here.
Well, I don't think he's not trying to save robot life. He's trying to save this one, because that one he happened to see was still alive. And the junker's like, whatever, it's going to die anyway. Who cares? Mm-hmm. You know? So like it maybe less about his own compassion and in combination maybe with the lack of compassion from this human he was dealing with. Maybe it is a combination.
It was definitely the lack of compassion.
Yeah.
But it was also compassion, like a real emotion forming in Gazik. And
but
that kind of love and compassion is the opposite of what hate,
this is
where he gets eventually.
This is a terrible comparison, so don't dig too deep. Don't make a one-to-one analog.
I love
don't make a one-to-one analog here.
I'm doing a whole nother podcast episode about whatever you're about to say.
That's like criticizing someone who goes to like the ASPC and just adopts one dog, or one cat. Hey. Like, oh, you got one. Why didn't you get all 50 of them, huh?
Right.
What are you, some heartless
or
bastard?
anyone who adopts a human child or anything? Yeah,
exactly. See, so
and it's always coming from the guy who's never done anything for anyone. Yeah, I've never saved a robot. That's not true. One time I crashed my drone into a tree and I climbed up and got it.
Well, congratulations. You're Charlie Brown.
There you go.
Yeah. So it's about in that moment making that gut feeling, and probably if to move it out of that ridiculous metaphor I just made, probably for Gazik, that was the first time he's felt that emotion.
Yes.
That yes, he has his wife, but feeling that compassion for a child, and for wanting to care for another life form there. It was probably the first time he ever had that emotion, and it was so strong for him that the only thing he could do was do anything he could, and I think that there is commentary there about his evolution and maybe all robots' evolution on the idea that they have this capacity for love, that it's not just programming, it's not just what I'm supposed to feel because we are told this is what humans feel, but to genuinely feel that emotion, to be moved to the point of acting this way when no other robot probably would. Again, I think this goes back to the idea of that is a very human action. To see someone, especially a child, who is hurt and in need, and to feel that compassion and do something that is irrational. I'm going to take this home and I'm going to care for it. I'm going to take this child home and do everything I can for it because it needs help. And that is an irrational thing to do from a robot standpoint, but it is an incredibly human thing to do. And I think that's what he's trying to convey there. What Urasawa is trying to get across about what robots are capable, and how that line blurs between just doing everything by the book, as we'll say, perfectly analytical, perfectly rational, versus doing whatever feels right in the moment, acting on pure emotion, which is by definition what humans.
Well, it does. It sort of opens up to more of the kind of what is a robot, what is a human thing that he does throughout this, where like, you know, if you really think about it, like that robot that's being discarded, it is just kind of a machine, right? Yeah. Like I said, I think in the last episode that like I drive through the university around here and they've got those the little food delivery robots. And I'll catch myself even now, like if it's kind of stopped, I'm like, oh man, like the poor, it can't go across. Like I'm feeling bad for it. It's like, this is like a completely like GPS controlled thing. Like, it obviously doesn't matter, but like, if it's like flipped over and something, like would I flip it back over? It's like, well, I gotta help it out, help out this robot. So it almost plays up on that more. It's like these robots are being discarded. How different is that than just, the lamp that was discarded? Like at what point almost is it like, do you get to kind of feel bad for this thing? And that's like understandable, right? If I threw a keyboard in the trash, no one's like, you're not feeling bad for the kid,
right? I got a new refrigerator. I threw my old one out. I mean, nothing wrong with the old one, but it's got a new one.
Even throw your shelf sofa and your laptop out, right? Like they're pretty strong, but like at what point is it like, I feel bad for it now?
I have resisted as long.
Where does the empathy level start? At what point is it justified, and at what point is it ridiculous? Yeah.
Okay,
definitely.
Well, so one of the books that we covered last year was a modern take on the Flintstones that someone did. And Cole, I don't know if you watched the Flintstones comics or cartoons ever as a kid, but all of the appliances and everything were animals who could talk, and always were like the butt of every joke. They're like, oh, I can't believe I'm the garbage disposal. And we as the audience were supposed to feel a connection with the appliances because they could think and talk. And I think the robots are really the same way here. Anytime we can like anthropomorphize it and it starts to look and feel kind of human, we start to think it deserves human rights. And I think that's part of the debate that this book invites us to have.
Absolutely. The idea of, is showing human traits, programmed or not, or in this case specifically programmed, if showing and acting like humans, is that enough to say that these beings deserve the same level of empathy as we give humans, that we think we're supposed to give our fellow man? Are robot rights the same as human rights? Are we treating them the same because they appear the same, they present as the same, even though we know they're robots? Is there any difference? I think that's the question that kind of at the heart, I think, of what Urasawa is trying to get at, using robots as the obvious metaphor for any othered group, right? Anything that is outside of what the majority is, of how do we see them, and is it any different if just because they're mechanical, because they're programmed? If they appear to think and feel and act like humans do, then why shouldn't we think and feel about them the same way we do as humans? And
I think one of the great tricks that Urasawa is doing here is if you try to say to someone, oh, this book is all about what makes something a human, what makes something a robot, if robots were intelligent, if AI advanced X far, would they have rights? It would be like, no, that's definitely not what it's all about. In the same way that if you try to tell someone like, oh, it's a murder mystery, it's a detective piece, it's a neo-noir thing, it's like, well, that's also not quite everything, because it's layered and it's complex. And I think any level you want to interact with this on, it will meet you there and give you plenty to explore.
Absolutely. But I think it goes back to how the story starts. It starts off as a murder mystery. It starts off as this detective neo-noir story. And you think you're getting that kind of story. And then as you go through it, all these extra layers are getting thrown on there, these larger existential questions about what is a human, about humanity, the idea of personhood and all of that stuff that, kind of get, they get not shoehorned in, they get Trojan horse in. You come, you think you're getting one kind of story, and then you realize, oh, no, that's not the story you're actually being told. It's something much, much larger, but that was your entree. That's how you got into the story. And then you're being served something much, much grander that makes you think and consider all these different ideas. When if you just start with the big ideas, you probably turn people off. People maybe don't want to necessarily think of, you need to give them you need to give them a way in to then hit them with the bigger things. If you just start with the big idea, a lot of people either can't or don't want to wrap their mind around that. But if you give it to them in a smaller, more appetizing form, something that a little more familiar with, and then you widen the scope, then now you've got them. Now they're in for the story, and now they're going to take in all the things you want to say beyond who's killing these robots.
Yeah, I think to me that's the mark of like just great storytelling. It's when you can't be hemmed into one genre. And I've been reading like a little mystery series lately, and I'm like, well, this is like pretty good mystery. I don't know why this is like considered pulp. They're like the little mass market paperback things. It's a series. There's like 27 of them. And then I read something like this. I'm like, oh, that's why that's pulp, because it's it's well done, but it's just a mystery. Yeah. Whereas something like this is just another level of art where it's weaving together all kinds of
exactly
thoughts and experienes and genres.
I don't think you're saying that series is bad. It's just
no. It's just what it is.
Knows exactly what it is, right? And they do it 27 times over. And that's what, if you're reading those books, that's what you expect, right? You want that same thing. You're reading it for that. But yeah, there are lesser versions of that, and there are greater versions of that. I think a book like this he's wanting to get, Urasawa is wanting to get at these larger ideas. He wants to put these out there. He wants the audience to think about and sit and maybe wrestle with these ideas, but he knows he has to get them to you somehow that maybe you're not expecting, And yeah, I think that comes down to his skill as a storyteller, that he knows how to set the hook, right? He knows how to get that in there. So, by the time what's hit you, you're 3, 4, 5 volumes in, and you're no longer thinking about the murder mystery. You're thinking about the bigger ideas, which was his goal all along. I don't think he set out to tell a murder mystery story. He wants to have a larger commentary on humanity, on society. And that was just his way in, was through this classic story, this classic story that he starts off reimagining as a murder mystery, as a detective story, and then can put all of his extra stuff on it. And it doesn't feel weighed down by it. It feels elevated by it.
Yeah. And I think that is the other piece of the hat trick that I even forget to mention sometimes when I'm listing all the accolades. I'm like, and it was pre-existing material. Yeah. Like it was the story that's already been told, and he's able to pack all of this into it, or rather extract this much more, like so much more than the original author meant.
That's a very, very fine needle that he threaded. All those aspects to get together and to have the story work on all the levels that it does for someone who's never read the original Astro Boy story, who's never maybe read any Astro Boy, someone who maybe read that original Astro Boy story and loved it. I think there are things for all those kinds of people. Any level of knowledge coming in from none, like myself, or someone, let's say even, who's like super hardcore Astro Boy fan, I'm sure they all got something out of it. And again, I goes back to what I said at the beginning of why I think I understand why this book has been so lauded, why it has won awards, why people look at it as like, this is a hell of a story right here. Like this is the good stuff right here. It all makes sense when you get to the end and you see how how he comes in and presents all of his ideas and gets to the end and have it all work and weave together like that. And again, feel like you're not missing anything out of the story he was trying to tell you. You're getting all those points. You get the narrative story, you get the larger message, you get the character beats. He pays off all of that stuff while still leaving you wanting more, not feeling satisfied in the story, but unsatisfied in the world. And I think that's the kind of, stories that I gravitate, that I love, are those types of stories where I got the story I wanted. That was awesome. And then I want to know what happens next. I want to know more. I want to spend more time in that world. I want to keep exploring those ideas, even though the narrative that the author is told is done, is exhausted. The ideas that he thought of, the ideas he was trying to get across, stick with me as a reader, and if those lodge in my brain and I'm still wrestling with those and turning them over in my head, then I know I've spent my time well with the story. It's been worthwhile at that point.
Yeah. And speaking of authorial intent, I mentioned to you guys before we started recording this postscript in volume 8, and this is actually from Takashi Nagasaki, who I think was the artist for this series.
No, Nagasaki, I think.
No, he co-authored it.
Co-author, yeah.
Yeah, he is, I believe.
But he is a writer and editor on his own.
I think he is kind of Urasawa's editor and almost like collaborator. Like the way I've always sort of seen it presented is it's almost like who's like the Beatles producer that they always call like, the fifth Beatle.
Okay.
George Martin.
George Martin, yeah.
He's kind of like that, right? Like he and Urasawa
behind the glass, but yeah, nothing happens without him.
Yeah, it's not really, this guy and Urasawa, but it's like they kind of are a package deal a little bit.
I do think when you look up Pluto, I do think they are both credited as co-authors.
They may be on this one.
Yeah, it's just
yeah.
At the very bottom in the small font beneath the 8, it says co-authored with Takashi Nagasaki.
Okay.
Yeah.
And supervised by
the germ of the
Tezuka.
idea of adapting the story, that comes from Urasawa. Yeah, but maybe the actual execution,
writing the script
is
and
him and
storyboards is Urasawa.
Yeah.
But you can see Nagasaki's interest in this. He talks about when he was a kid and this original story came out, and how, Astro Boy hadn't been cool for a while, although he secretly always liked him. Other kids started getting back into Astro Boy because of this greatest robot in history. And his friend Masudo, who he was stealing all his manga from, he said he turned to me with very sad eyes and announced Pluto died in yesterday's issue of Shonen. And he says, I was thunderstruck and wondered what Osamu Tezuka had really been trying to say with this story. Adam was the only one left standing, Matsudo said. So Tezuka must be saying that Adam's the strongest robot in history. Matsuda's confident interpretation of the story didn't seem exactly right to me, but I kept my mouth shut because I figured that the third smartest kid in our class couldn't be wrong. 40 years later, I finally came up with my counter interpretation of the story. So he says, Urasawa and I were making our plans to remake The Greatest Robot on Earth, and we were grappling with the unavoidable question of what Osamu Tezuka would have focused on if he were alive today. War immediately came to mind, but Tezuka's views on war are very complicated. And then at the very end here, he says, Osamu Tezuka wasn't saying anything about Adam being the strongest robot in history. On the contrary, I think he was trying to say that having experienced battle, Adam was the first robot in history to understand the meaninglessness of war. That's what he was trying to say, and that's my response to Matsudo. So 40 years later, he's come up with a response to his third grade classmate. But a pretty good one.
Yeah, I think that's great, though. I think, again, we were chatting a little pre-recording, the idea of what this story, maybe that the original Astro Boy story could mean to people, readers of different ages. Because as a kid, if you're reading this, you see these robots battle and fight or whatnot, and there's one left standing. He's got to be the best because he's the strongest. He won, right? It's the idea of strength. Projected, literally, he won. He's the last one standing. Everyone else died. So that's what it means to be the best, to be the greatest.
Right, it's king of the hill.
Exactly. It's to be a champion. And then I think as you age, maybe, and hopefully as you mature, and you have a greater understanding of the world and more experience in it, you understand that it's not about keeping score per se. It's not about winning and losing. It's not about being the champion. It's about the kind of person you are, right? And I think that's what they're trying to say here. Again, the idea of a robot ascending to this level, the idea of choosing to go against what he's expected to do, this idea of being a weapon, choosing a path of peace, choosing a greater understanding of both being a robot and in a lot of ways being a human, because they're the humans who are like, got to kill this robot, right? This, we have to go to war, we have to fight, we have to destroy this thing. And so Adam has ascended to a plane above even that, a greater understanding for both robots and humans. And what they're saying now is that is what being the greatest robot is, or the greatest. In this case, you can replace that. The greatest human, the greatest person on earth is someone who ascends and has that level of clarity and has that understanding of the world, that rejection of violence and hatred, that acceptance of love and compassion, and just understanding of what doesn't need to be put out and what doesn't need to be done. And at the same time, still ordering a hit on the president. And his evil teddy bear robot, still making the hard choices there. But again, the overall idea. I think
it's fair for Brow to assassinate the teddy bear.
Yeah. Going after the president was a little tough, but
it's extremely tough, especially since that president would have rolled over on Teddy at that point, because Teddy made it very clear, you will be my slave. I'm saving you.
That could be a thing too, where like Adam was like, you got to go take out Teddy. And Brow was like, yeah, totally. Got it. I got it. I'll do that. And then when he gets there, it's like, there's like, you know what? Gonna call an audible here. I'm going to do what I said I'm going to do, but I'm also going to take out this meat puppet here, because you know what? That's what I do. That's on brand for me. So I wouldn't be shocked if he went off script there. Obviously there's no follow-up to it, but I could see that being a plausible explanation of no. Adam just wanted him to go and take out the power behind the throne, the robot there. And Brow was like, yeah, got it. No problem. That's exactly what I'll do. Yeah. No worries. Consider it done.
He does seem the type. That being said, I mean, Brow had figured out something interestingly long before any of the other characters. And he also had all of Gazik's information from when they swapped chips. Now, he didn't have the final details of the investigation unless Adam then gave that to him as well. But
he might have.
This guy had all kinds of.
There is the
information.
But again, that follows the character archetype of, again, like the Hannibal Lecter, things like that. Like, how does this guy know everything? He's in a jail cell, but yet he is the smartest person in the room. He's the one that has all the answers. And again, he's the character that never lies because he's the worst person in the world. He's always telling you the truth. So everything you have to believe everything he says because there's no other option. But yeah, he falls into that archetype of he always knows more than he's letting on. And he always knows a little more than our characters who are forced to be in a position where they have to get his counsel,
And I think he wants everyone to think he knows even more than he knows.
And probably too, yeah, because that's his only leverage, right?
That's where his power comes from.
Exactly. Every time, it's why every time we see that scene in especially in Western media, any TV movie, anytime our ostensible protagonist has to go and stand either between like a plexiglass screen or jail cell to converse with our criminal, our bad guy, or one of our bad guys. What does that bad guy always do? They either want to play some sort of game or they speak in obvious riddles, because the whole point is I have to keep something for myself. Otherwise I have no utility. So Brow just he fills that very, very well trodden character archetype of whether I actually know more than you, I have to present that I know more than you. I have to act like I'm withholding. So you have a reason to come back.
Right. Otherwise I'm bored.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Basically, that's
you have to need me. If I tell you everything, then what use am I? So in order for me to stay in and maybe reach my ends or reach an end that's better than being locked up in the cell, I have to string you along. I have to show you that, yes, I have to give you enough that you trust me to know that I'm right, but I can't give you everything. So you keep coming back. You have to keep relying on me, and I think Brow puts himself into that position to the point where Adam basically has no other choice than like, you've done this now, and now I'm going to free you so you can go do the one thing that only you can do, So yeah, that's a well-worn character archetype that I think is deployed very well here. Said you see Hannibal Lecter in Brown. You see those serial killers anytime it's like a to catch a thief kind of situation. The only guy, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So great twist, and I do like that darker tinge that we get of Adam, and I think it's really up to the reader to decide how much that reflects on Adam and how much is Brow being Brow.
Yeah.
And I like that too. But
again,
Adam was absolutely ready to kill.
Yes,
and calls it off last second, and then. How often do you get that ending where it's the big battle, and instead of one of them ripping the other one's head off, they both sit down and start crying? I mean, it's a different kind of story, right? There's never been a Batman movie that ends that way.
Yeah, maybe there should be. Maybe they'd better. Actually, that's a very Tom King way to end things.
I was just going to say, I was going to say
characters just breaking down and having existential crises. Tom King's an American comic writer who is known for
manga
being
fans out there.
Yeah, he's very the joke is he writes superheroes who stare out of windows crying. Like he's very, very existential with the way he writes his characters, be it Batman or Supergirl or whoever it is.
He takes long established
they're
characters.
Not all punchy.
Yeah. Right. He takes long established characters and says, what must be wrong with them psychologically that they're still doing this after 56 years? And
what if they were
through the
trauma, broken people? I'm going to write that story instead of the guy who saves the world all the time. But no, I think it goes back to the idea of having some ambiguity with Adam, and that ambiguity again is just a fundamental part of being human, that no one is just one thing. And that if you knew exactly what Adam would do, if you could predict everything that Adam did, then he would just be a robot, because that's what robots do, right? Robots don't lie. They can't kill. They have rules in terms of how they are governed and how they have to act. And it's that bit of irrationality, ambiguity that makes humans human. The line I wrote down here, I can't remember who's saying it right now. I didn't write down, but he's talking. It's a kid who's talking with Tenma, and Tenma's basically like, "Yep, the world's going to end." Like, that's kind of as we're building towards a climax, right? Like, Boar is going to come out, and this bomb's going to go off somewhere in a state park in America or not America, and that's going to basically be an extinction level event, right? And this character is basically like, he's saying like, no matter where we hide, we will die, but even if they know they will die, they know they're going to die no matter what they do, they will do not abandon hope. And that's what it means to be human. And that's what he's saying. That's what Adam is doing here, that regardless, in the face of overwhelming odds, in the face of certain death, the idea of still rushing in and acting and trying and till the very last moment, believing there's an out, believing there's a way to be saved. Like, that's a wildly irrational human thought. And it's a celebrated human thought in so many stories. The idea of standing your ground and in the face of like the literal apocalypse, right? How many stories are like that? And that's a defining characteristic of humanity that is used throughout stories, all kinds of stories throughout the ages. And I think that here Urasawa is he's putting that into what Adam is doing, that even though Adam knows he's going to go down into the earth, and at some point, his body is going to melt, right? As he tries to save this. And it's only because Pluto is there to use his hand as a shield, basically. But before he does that, he's willing to sacrifice himself. He's willing to go into certain death to try and stave off the end of the world. Whether he's successful or not, he believes he can, and he will believe he can all the way into the end, even if he were to fail. Again, that's we celebrate that sort of mindset, as crazy and as nuts as that is. We celebrate that as being human. You know, that's an aspect of humanity that we laud, and Urasawa has given that to Adam as another way to show that maybe we're not so different here. That robots can do this. That they can move beyond their programming and move into that space of irrationality of, I can still win. There's always still hope. There's always something we can do, as opposed to just doing the math and be like, well, we're screwed, I'm done, and just like peacing out. You know?
And I mean, so tell me if I'm wrong here, but my reading of the story, my impression all along was that the robots are nobler, like they're better than the people. They're morally more pure. They're functionally more altruistic.
Well, interesting. I wouldn't read it that way. I guess it goes back to your idea of what being perfect is. If the idea of being emotionless and always making the right choice, because you're making like the analytical choice, right? You're not letting emotion define how you act, how you treat people. It's like treating everyone the same, not because you've accepted everyone's differences, just because you see everyone as data. Excuse me. That's kind of a cold way to read it, but I read it in that way, in terms of how, like, especially when we see Gazit early on, when he's like the dour, self-hating detective, you know, he's like, I do my job well, because he acts without any emotion. He doesn't know why. I guess it's because that part of his memory was wiped, but he is presented as like the perfect cop because he has no emotion, because he simply works the case and just does his job, whatever he's told. And whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, I think is left to the reader. If that's what perfection is supposed to be, to act without emotion, to act solely analytically. I
mean, I'm just comparing every time there's a robot, like whether it's the cops making flippant remarks about Gazik, and him protecting a human supremacist who's insulting him the whole time. Like, he's always taking the high road, taking the more noble action, looking out for people who do not look out for him. And Gazik was that way. Certainly Mont Blanc was that way. North was that way, trying to care for this man and help him create his music, even though the man said horrible things about him every single day. So I was like, at least these 7 robots.
Maybe those 7, yeah.
Right.
I can see that.
Yeah, not necessarily the Rosie from the Jetsons, cleaning bot. But
maybe what he's trying to say there is that robots can ascend to that level, that it's possible to transcend. And
right. And then when they get emotion, and even when they got human emotion and he sank into like hatred or taking some rash action, it was like, yeah, dude, like, I'm with you, like, you have my full support. I would have been there a long time ago. So I found that they were relatable, and I think there was supposed to be, in my reading of it, some inherent nobility to these 7. Like, this was the best of what humanity has to offer. And literally, like, humanity created these with what we considered,
I can buy that,
the best attributes of ourselves.
Well, and that's the way they're sort of treated by most of the kind of citizens, right? Like, everyone really respected Mont Blanc.
Right.
Everyone loved the 2 wrestler guys, Hercules and
Brando.
Brando, right? Epsilon, obviously very loved by all the kids at, like, the orphanage and stuff. Like, so
but
that's
the
how
random,
they're viewed by the humans in the universe.
But the random beat cop robot, like, is he viewed that way, or the cleaning robot? So maybe it is just those 7 that they were already revered as these paragons, these pillars of achievement or whatever, of humanity's of almost like they're revered for humanity's goodness. Like, look what we created, look what we did here. And yet I'm guessing the idea is that they've ascended beyond that, because every time we see humans, for the most part, we see humans like we're terrible. Like, we're all of our worst instincts, that all the worst traits and attributes that we see in the real world, Urasawa puts that in and just directs it towards robots. And again, that's where the the metaphor anytime we have these kind of stories about AI and robotics and things like that. The metaphor is never that subtle. It's always very it can't help but be obvious. But yeah, I think these 7 are meant to be, this is what we could be, but we have this other level that we just can't get past.
Yeah. And there's certainly a sense of, this is why we can't have dice things, humanity.
Yeah.
Like look what we did.
Yeah. Ultimately, I think part of the commentary is that humans are terrible. But maybe we can change. But I think Urasawa did not put anything in the book as exaggerated as some of it may have been, as any storyteller would. Like, there are no lies there in terms of how humans would treat robots, because you just switch out robots for any other group,
right.
And there are no lies there. There's no fabrication. There's nothing that's out of the ordinary. Like, nothing absurd like that. We're better than that. We would never do that. It's like, no, we've literally done all of that and we're still doing it now. Like,
right.
We are not better than this. This is
the worst kind of villain group I guess we have in this manga is based off something way worse even, right? Like, we have
that's true.
the little KKK in this manga, and that's somehow like that group is like a little bit better than what we have in real life.
It's as bad as they are. It's still a sanitized version of how they actually are. So we are not shown humanity as a whole in the greatest light, but it's just a mirror, and it might even be a shined up mirror. It's not actually as bad as we are, but it's still, those are the worst actions and impulses of society as in general. He just puts that in the comic, and it fits naturally. It fits perfectly into the story. Those 1-to-1 or like 1-to-0.75 translations, they still work. You recognize all those things as obvious or as subtle as they may be. They're all there and reflective of our actual society.
Yeah. I have pretty much exhausted my notes, especially since I do want to save something in case we come back to discuss the anime, which I like. Unless it's the worst thing I've ever seen, I will want to come back and discuss it. In fact, if it's the worst thing I've ever seen, I will want to have a rage discussion about how you could botch material this good. But all indications so far seem like it's going to be great. But I want to open the floor for you guys. Anything else you want to say about Pluto 7 and 8 or Pluto as a series before we call it quits?
I think my last note I have is just I love how Urasawa chose to sort of adapt Tezuka's like visual style. If you there's an image you can find out there if you just Google like whatever Pluto versus Astro Boy comparison or something like that shows like a lot of the characters like next to each other, and it's very funny. Like Dr. Tenma especially, it's like, oh, this,
I'm guessing there was no Hitler character, no Saddam Hussein character.
No, those weren't there. Well, the sort of Saddam Hussein character is almost depicted in like a maybe kind of a worse way.
Oh my gosh, I have found it. Oh yeah,
it's maybe like a little.
I'm looking at the same thing here. Yeah.
That's gonna be on our Instagram and our Twitter when this episode comes out.
Yeah, that character might be like maybe a little more insensitive even, but a lot of the other characters, I just think like the 1-to-1 between like both Tenmas is hilarious. Like
they got the big hair swoop.
Yeah. I think he does such a good job of making these characters like feel like his own and feel realistic.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
Still being like the same. It's like when Tenma popped up on the screen, it's like, oh, it's very, very obvious who that is. Some of them are a little different. Like obviously Epsilon had
super different. Yeah.
The robot's like human forms. That's not a thing in Astro Boy. So that's a little weird. Yeah. But like. A lot of the characters, even like Pluto, or I mean,
like just
Bora,
there's two poses when you compare the Pluto in the old one and the new one.
Mm-hmm.
The fluidity of the movement of Pluto, it's like, oh, he's this menacing thing, and the dude looks like he cannot bend his knees or elbows in the original Astro Boy, and I'm like, how is he pulling off all these murders?
But you're right on that though. But we look at the picture that I'm seeing here, like the body shape is similar. Like the
Yes.
silhouette, the outline would look the same in terms of the very huge broad shoulders, down to
the horns.
basically a triangle, and the horns obviously
Right.
there. But yeah, the body shape is the same, and so there's an obvious familiarity. Like it's not one to one, but it's unmistakable. It's unmistakable when you see them side by side. No, that's great. I'm glad you called attention to that, Cole. That's because some of them are
well, and I like that Pluto or that Adam is allowed to wear pants now.
Yeah,
I would have felt uncomfortable.
And the hoodie,
8 volumes.
Yeah, he gets to wear the hoodie.
And they gave him the little cowlick like off to the side rather than the straight up alfalfa little rascals. I mean,
even some of these, like I'm looking at Gazette, and obviously Gazette is much more in the original manga. He's much more robotic there, but there's something about the way the eyes are drawn and the line down the nose where like there's a cue there, a visual cue. He picked up the parts of the face that match, even though the face is drawn completely different, it's a human face. There's something about how maybe the angle of the eyes, the relationship, the proportion there, how he designed it, like it is unmistakable. If you showed me that character, it'd been like, that's Gazette. Like that has to be Gazette. If I saw them without the side by side, some of them I wouldn't get because you're right. Human form robot is different, but someone like Gazette, 100%, you're like, oh no, that's who that's supposed to be. Like you can see, I would have guessed that absolutely 100%. So
well, it's just sometimes you'll see things on Twitter or whatever where it's like one manga artist draws another's character or something like that,
Sure.
and sometimes it's like, oh, okay, that's cool, like you can you tell that like they adapted it into their style, and then there's other times like, well, whatever, you just drew Naruto with like Goku's face. And it's like that's not like that. That's not. That doesn't look like that character, right? Like you just kind of changed their clothes. Whereas this one, it really feels like it's very much like, oh, like these are Astro Boy characters drawn in Tezuka's style or in Urasawa's style, right? Like
it's like he found the essence of the character in a lot of those cases and just put it in his style. But yeah, there's enough there where it's not like you can see whether you can articulate it or not. You can just see like there's something there. Like I 10 was very obvious, but some of the other ones are a little more subtle. You can just see where he pulled that inspiration from to draw his characters and have them feel like that original, that the original art, the original manga. That's really cool. Yeah, definitely put that out there so people can see that much.
Yeah, I'm going to have to remember weeks from now when the thing posts, but with the three of us, our powers combined, I think we can remember to post one picture to social media.
Maybe we'll see.
I have to say, I think Alex and I are both pretty bad at social media, at least for our podcast.
Yeah, generally pretty bad.
You're a prolific tweeter on your own.
But it's about nonsense. So,
as opposed to this podcast,
which is very important and very serious.
Yes. Great distinction. Anyway, Alex, was there any last note from you?
I don't think so. I think that's everything I have.
Went totally out of order for any kind of traceable, discernible, logical pattern.
No. I don't think I have. I think we've hit all the major points here I had at the end. I think, I come back to the idea of this being a shorter story from a manga standpoint, because Urasawa was adapting something that was existing. And I think the strengths of that, of it not being a 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 volume story that went on and on and on and on and on, when clearly it could have. He could have done his whole, he could have done a whole, I'm going to reimagine Astro Boy in general.
Sure.
Right. And just keep going and put his spin on that original manga altogether. But for him to just focus on this one and tell a contained story that has distinct beginning, middle, and end, and a satisfying end, and that this is what you're going to read, and there's not 90 more volumes coming after it. I think something like that helps his storytelling, that not just that he's adapting a story that everyone in Japan probably already knows. He knows what he's going to tell. The idea of, I think we talked about it in the early episodes, either last week or the previous weeks, of how much he would have had planned for his version of the story, going into it. And it feels like he had to have had these major points. Like he had to have known what Gazit's entire story was. It just feels that way for him to place all those character beats in there and to put all those breadcrumbs in. He had to know what he was going to do with Gazit before it started. I would love to know if like he had some full series Bible, like a full outline of like, here's what I'm going to hit. Maybe he doesn't know exactly when he's going to get to it, but he knows what all these major points are. Because he knows it's not going to run on forever. This is effectively just a miniseries. The way we would look at it in North American comics, Western comics, is this is like a maxi series, a miniseries, 8 issues is whatever you want to call it. And he told his story. And when you have a story like that, when you approach a story like that, you can write the whole thing in advance. Or if you haven't written all the scripts in advance, you can have the whole story at your disposal. So you and your creators can know that in issue 1 or volume 1, you know what's going to be important in volume 5. And when you get there, you're doing that because you already know what's going to be important in volume 8, And so all those things inform backwards. So you can tell a story that feels much more connected, and it makes you, the creator seem far more clever. Be like, oh, look what I put back on page 3 that became important on the second to last page of the whole story, and it doesn't, it comes off as being clever, but really what it comes off as being is just being organized and having a full story and having that already in your mind. So you can pull from all of that as you're telling it, as you're parsing it out into these individual chapters, individual volumes, individual issues for Western comics, whatever it may be. Having these contained stories, a limited series stories, in a way gives you that freedom to pull from all parts of your story, as opposed to having to keep making it up as you're going,
Right.
And then, because then there are always questions about pacing and timing and how much story is too much. And why did we read this 3-issue arc here that had no purpose in anything, which it could have felt that way when we got those 3 chapters of North number 2, complete side story out here. Why is this important? We're just getting the story of who our characters are and what this murder mystery is. And now we're getting this side story that seems to have no relevance. What do we just do? We just fill in pages here. But you see the importance of that, very quickly in the following chapters. But as we get further along in the story, even though that's the only time, except for when Adam brings him up again at the end, you don't see or hear from North number 2 at all for the next 7 volumes. He's just not in the story, but that was critical to what Urasawa was trying to do. And he knows he can put that in there because he knows it's going to be important later, as opposed to, I got to fill 3 issues here, so let's just tell a story about another robot. Let's put something in here now to expand the world, just to expand it, as opposed to what Urasawa has done, is it expanding the world in a way that is going to be important. Just we, the reader, we, the audience, we just don't know it yet. But when it does come to fruition, it's going to make the whole story seem that much more full, that much more complete.
Yeah. Which, again, just no excuse for anyone adapting this, when it's like the whole thing's like 1,500 pages, you can know where it's going.
Yeah.
There's no reason to get clever with it. If you're going to change Pluto at all for the anime, maybe like a reverse change back to an Astro Boy point or something like that. But it doesn't need to be redone again.
Or what you can do is you can decide maybe the timeline, the order in which you deliver the story.
You can present it differently, right?
Exactly, because there have to be changes when something is any sort of adaptation is made. There have to be some sort of changes. But when you have a complete story, you do have the freedom, and hopefully you have the wherewithal of knowing when you can reorder things, because the way some storytelling works in one medium is not necessarily and hardly ever the way it's going to work when you move it to another medium. You can't do the exact same things. You can't follow the exact same beats. So having the complete story there, if you have creators that are kind of worth their salt, they'll know that they can pull things from later in the story and give that to the audience earlier, because they can still achieve the same end, but maybe through a slightly different route. But but they're not changing it. They're not giving you anything different. They're just giving it to you in a different order because maybe they can't get to everything in the story. Because they're not going to.
I don't have any problem with
Yeah,
scrambling the order.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be the same as reading page by page.
Yeah.
But I just mean
drastic changes to character and things like that. That's trying to do something
tone,
maybe.
Anything like that.
That's getting out of your skis, I think.
I think they could probably scale back some of the war in Iraq thing.
Definitely.
Iraq, Afghanistan, and they could update that, and that would feel like we did a modernization 20 years later from the thing that was 50 years later.
Because that isn't critical to the story. What's critical is there's a war. What's not critical is the specifics of that war.
And war is timeless, so we can just keep retelling this story.
Yeah. That being a non-subtle analog to the U.S. war in Iraq is a product of the time and when it was created. There's no question about that, right? It has to be because this came out in the early aughts. So those specifics are important. And I don't even think the specifics of the fact that the kingdom of Persia or whatever, it has to be Middle Eastern at that point. Maybe they want to keep that. Maybe they still want to be King Darius. I think we see some of that maybe in the trailers there, but that is a non-critical aspect of the story. They could keep that, they could change it. It doesn't affect anything. All that matters is we have this giant war that engulfed the world. Like that's what's critical to it. The war was why we created these robots, these super robots to begin with. That's our inciting factor. So as long as we have that, whether it's the exact same thing that Urasawa presented in his story or not, as long as that's there, that's what's important. So yeah, details like that, I'm with you. Those aren't critical. They could decide to do that. They could decide not to do that. It's not going to change anything, except maybe prevent someone from being like, wait a minute, that guy looks like Saddam Hussein. Is that intentional or not? Maybe you eliminate those questions from the audience.
Yeah. Anyway, looking forward to discussing it. If you guys will agree to join me when the anime is out, and otherwise, hope everyone enjoyed the book. Hope everyone enjoys the anime, which drops on Netflix 2 days after this episode. So you have just enough time to chew on it and be able to say the book was better, regardless of how good the anime is, which is something I know every book reader loves to say. So without any further ado, Cole, thank you again for packing this onto your schedule. Already
if you're listening to this,
2 a week.
Yeah, and you want more manga talk, definitely follow Cole over on his natural home over on the Tankobon Podcast. Again, all the links to their sites and everything are in the show description. So Cole, cannot thank you enough. This was an absolute blast to do. And again, speaking as someone who not just didn't read manga, just like actively avoided it, to the point where again it just became an overall bit for me. This was an absolute blast to do, and I had so much fun.
Yeah, no, thank you guys. Yeah, it was fun. It lined up pretty well. I'm pretty, maybe a little neurotic on the way I read manga. I schedule things out, and this actually, when you guys asked me to do this podcast, actually lined up very well. I was in the middle of reading Astro Boy, so I was like, wow, sure. I was gonna get Pluto next, so let's do it. So yeah, this was awesome. A good time. So I appreciate you guys having me on these past few weeks.
Cool.
Yeah, and if you guys decide to cover that Astro Boy series, just that one story arc, we will be sure to link to that and hype the heck out of it, because I will be the first one listening to that, because I already have queued from the library. I think it's the third omnibus that has that.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go in cold, never having read old Astro Boy before, and I'm in for some shock therapy, I think. But
honestly, that's all you need. I think it's volume 3. It's a little weird because I think volume 1 and 2 are in like the same volume, and then it's like volume 3. I don't know exactly how it's broken up. There's a zillion different editions, but whatever, it's whatever volume 3 is, you should be good to go. It's Dark Horse who put them out.
Yeah. That was who was reprinting manga back in the day. The only places you could get them for a long time was Dark Horse reprints. So.
Yep, that's what my Lone Wolf and Cub is.
Yep.
So. Yep. All right, have a great one and enjoy the show, everyone.
Peace.
Thank you.